Margaret Ellis had always believed that family was worth every inconvenience. At 69, she lived alone in a quiet lakeside town in Vermont, surrounded by flower gardens she had spent years cultivating after her husband's passing. Life was peaceful, predictable, and exactly the way she liked it. That peace disappeared the moment her son called. "Mom, you have to come," Ethan pleaded over the phone. "The kids keep asking about you. Thanksgiving won't be the same without you." His voice sounded tired, almost desperate. Margaret hesitated. Holiday with travel had become exhausting, especially with crowded airports and delayed flights. Still, Ethan was her only son. She convinced herself that spending a few days with family was worth the effort. 2 days later, after an exhausting journey with delayed connections and aching knees, she stood outside Ethan's home in Portland, Oregon. Rain drizzled steadily, soaking her coat as she reached for the doorbell. The front door swung open almost immediately. Instead of a warm embrace, Ethan stood with car keys dangling from one hand. Beside him was his wife, Vanessa, dressed in designer travel clothes and wearing oversized sunglasses despite the gloomy weather. 2 expensive suitcases rested by the doorway, along with matching backpacks. Behind them, 8-year-old Oliver and 5-year-old Sophie sat on the living room floor watching cartoons. Margaret smiled. "Happy Thanksgiving." Neither adult returned the smile. Vanessa glanced at her watch. "Perfect timing," she said casually. Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom, you'll be watching the kids for the next few days." Margaret blinked. "I'm sorry?" "We're heading to a wellness resort outside the city," Vanessa explained, as if discussing the weather. "Everything's already booked." Margaret stared at them. "You invited me here to babysit?" Ethan avoided her eyes. "We figured you'd understand. We really need some time together." Vanessa laughed lightly. "And don't worry. We left instructions." She pointed toward the kitchen. Margaret followed her finger and noticed a thick binder resting neatly on the counter. The couple grabbed their luggage. Oliver looked up. "Grandma!" He ran over and hugged her tightly. The warmth of his little arms was the only genuine welcome she had received. Margaret hugged him back while watching Ethan and Vanessa wheel their suitcases toward the driveway. "Drive safely," she said quietly. Ethan looked surprised. You're not upset?" She smiled politely. "No. Have a pleasant trip." Within seconds, their SUV disappeared down the street. The silence inside the house felt unusually heavy. Margaret slowly carried her suitcase into the kitchen and placed it beside the table. The home looked nothing like the tidy house she remembered from her last visit. Dirty dishes filled the sink, laundry overflowed from baskets, toys covered the hallway. She picked up the binder Vanessa had mentioned. The first page read, "Grandma's schedule, breakfast. 7 a.m., school lunches, laundry every afternoon, vacuum daily, clean guest bathroom, meal preparation, bedtime routine, dog walking." A handwritten note at the bottom made her jaw tighten. "Please remember you're staying here for free, so helping with the house is only fair." Margaret closed the binder without saying a word. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't even family in their eyes. She had become unpaid help. She poured herself a glass of water and tried to calm the disappointment growing inside her. Then she noticed Ethan's tablet lying on the kitchen island. Its screen was still unlocked. Normally, she would never touch someone else's belongings, but an email notification appeared across the display. Reservation confirmed. 4 nights. Ocean Ridge Luxury Spa Resort. Curiosity got the better of her. She glanced through the booking confirmation. Private villa, couples massages, wine tastings, fine dining, luxury excursions. The payment information caught her attention immediately. The last 4 digits matched the emergency family account she had opened years ago. Her heartbeat slowed. That account wasn't created for vacations. After her husband's death, Margaret had placed money there for genuine emergencies, medical bills, urgent repairs, or unexpected hardships. Instead, they had used it to finance a luxury holiday while tricking her into becoming their unpaid nanny. She opened her banking app. The account still listed her as the primary owner. The balance showed just over $9,000. Margaret didn't hesitate. Within seconds, she transferred every dollar back into her personal account, leaving only $10 behind. She locked her phone. No anger, no tears, only clarity. She looked toward the living room where Oliver was helping Sophie stack colorful building blocks. The children had done nothing wrong. They deserved kindness. Their parents, however, had mistaken kindness for weakness. Margaret smiled softly at her grandchildren. Then she picked up her phone. She already knew exactly who she needed to call first. Margaret stepped quietly into the dining room before making the call. She didn't want Oliver or Sophie overhearing a conversation meant for adults. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Linda Carter, Vanessa's mother. Linda answered after the second ring. "Margaret? I thought you were spending Thanksgiving with Ethan." "I am," Margaret replied calmly. "At least I was supposed to." Linda immediately sensed something wasn't right. "What happened?" Margaret briefly explained everything. The surprise babysitting arrangement, the binder filled with chores, and Ethan and Vanessa leaving without even asking whether she had agreed. There was silence on the other end. Finally, Linda spoke. "They actually did that. I'm afraid so. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Thank you." Margaret ended the call and returned to the living room with a warm smile. "Who wants hot chocolate?" Both children cheered. For the next half hour, she forgot about the adults entirely. She helped Oliver build a cardboard castle while Sophie proudly showed off her collection of stuffed animals. Their excitement reminded Margaret that children naturally loved without conditions. They weren't responsible for the choices their parents had made. A doorbell interrupted the laughter. Linda stepped inside, carrying 2 grocery bags. The moment Margaret handed her the thick instruction binder, Linda's expression hardened. She flipped through page after page, laundry schedules, cleaning lists, cooking duties. Detailed instructions written as though Margaret had been hired for a full-time job. Linda slowly closed the binder. "I don't even know what to say." "Neither did I." Linda shook her head. "They never asked you?" "No." "They simply assumed?" Margaret nodded. Linda sighed deeply. "They've crossed a line." Margaret smiled gently. "I've already made my decision." She explained that she intended to leave that very afternoon and fly home. Linda looked surprised. "You're not staying?" "I came here expecting to spend Thanksgiving with my family, not to become unpaid household staff." Linda couldn't argue. "I'll stay with the children," she said firmly. "They'll be safe." Margaret thanked her sincerely before heading upstairs to collect her suitcase. She decided to gather her phone charger from the guest room. Passing Ethan's home office, she noticed the door standing slightly open. A notebook lay unfolded across his desk. She wasn't searching for private information. She simply intended to borrow a pen. But one page immediately caught her attention. At the top, written in bold letters, were the words, "5-year family." Her eyes drifted lower. One bullet point stopped her cold. "Convince Mom to sell Vermont house." Another followed. "Use proceeds toward home renovation and investment property." Then another. "Grandma can move into downstairs bedroom and handle childcare permanently." Saves thousands every month. Margaret felt the air leave her lungs. There was more. "She hates being alone." Once she's here full-time, she'll eventually agree. She quietly closed the notebook. The disappointment she had felt earlier transformed into certainty. This hadn't been a selfish weekend. It had been the first step in a carefully planned future where she would finance their dreams while giving up her own independence. For years, she had mistaken generosity for love. Now, she understood the difference. She picked up her suitcase and walked downstairs. Linda was reading stories to the children. Oliver looked up. "Grandma, are you leaving already?" Margaret knelt beside him. "I have to go home, sweetheart." His smile faded. "But Thanksgiving," she kissed his forehead. "We'll celebrate together another time. I promise." Oliver wrapped his arms around her one more time. "I love you. I love you too." Those 4 words strengthened her resolve. She hugged Sophie as well before quietly walking toward the front door. Outside, she noticed a silver crossover SUV parked beside the garage. 3 years earlier, she had purchased it for Ethan after he insisted their old vehicle wasn't reliable enough for family trips. Although Ethan drove it every day, Margaret had never transferred the title into his name. Legally, it still belonged to her. She removed the spare key hanging inside the hallway cabinet. Without saying another word, she loaded her suitcase into the SUV. Linda watched from the doorway. "What are you going to do now?" Margaret smiled peacefully. "I'm going home." As she drove toward Portland International Airport, her phone began vibrating. Ethan. She ignored it. A second call followed, then a third. Finally, on the fourth attempt, she answered through the vehicle's hands-free system. "Mom!" Ethan shouted. "What happened to the emergency account?" Margaret kept her eyes on the highway. "I moved my money back where it belongs. You can't do that." "I already did." Vanessa's angry voice echoed loudly from his end. "Our payment was declined. The hotel won't let us check in." Margaret remained perfectly calm. "Then perhaps it's time to pay for your own vacation." Silence filled the call. For the first time in years, Ethan had no answer. Ethan's breathing grew heavier on the other end of the call. "Mom, this isn't funny. I never intended it to be. We're standing in the hotel lobby. Everyone's staring at us." Margaret guided the SUV smoothly onto the interstate leading toward the airport. "I'm sorry you're uncomfortable. Please transfer the money back," Ethan pleaded. "We'll repay it later." Margaret remained silent for a moment. "That account was created after your father's funeral," she finally said. "It was meant for emergencies, illnesses, accidents, unexpected hardships, not luxury vacations. We just borrowed it. You never asked." Vanessa suddenly grabbed the phone. "Margaret, you're overreacting. Parents help their children all the time." Margaret's voice stayed steady. "Parents help when they're treated with honesty and respect. This is unbelievable," Vanessa snapped. "You're ruining our holiday." Margaret sighed softly. "No, Vanessa. Your holiday ended the moment you treated me like hired help." Without waiting for another response, she ended the call. The silence inside the SUV felt comforting. For the first time in years, Margaret wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's expectations. She reached the airport less than 40 minutes later. After parking inside the long-term garage, she gathered her luggage and paused beside the vehicle. The silver SUV gleamed beneath the overhead lights. Legally, it still belonged to her. She locked the doors, slipped the keys into her handbag, and took a photograph of the parking space number. Then she sent Ethan a brief text. "Your vehicle is parked safely at Portland International Airport, Level 3, Section C. Since it's registered in my name, I'll decide what happens to it. Please don't contact me again this week." She immediately blocked both Ethan's and Vanessa's phone numbers. No dramatic speeches, no arguments. Only boundaries. Inside the terminal, Margaret purchased the earliest available flight home. The airline employee smiled warmly as she handed over the boarding pass. "Heading home for Thanksgiving?" Margaret smiled back. "Yes." This time she truly meant it. Several hours later, her daughter Emily waited outside Burlington International Airport. Unlike Ethan, Emily had never expected financial support from her mother. She built her own career, paid her own bills, and visited simply because she enjoyed spending time together. The moment Margaret climbed into Emily's car, her daughter studied her expression. "You came home early." "I did." Emily laughed softly. "I'm guessing Thanksgiving didn't go as planned." Margaret summarized everything during the drive: the invitation, the babysitting scheme, the chore binder, the emergency account, the notebook outlining plans to convince her to sell her house. Emily listened without interrupting. When Margaret finished, Emily shook her head. "I warned you they were becoming entitled. You did. I'm just sorry you had to discover how far it had gone." Margaret looked out the window at the familiar Vermont countryside. "So am I." Emily reached across the center console and gently squeezed her mother's hand. "But I'm proud of you." Those simple words meant more than Emily realized. For years, Margaret had questioned whether setting limits made her selfish. Now, she finally understood that protecting herself wasn't selfish at all. It was necessary. Thanksgiving at Emily's house couldn't have been more different. Everyone cooked together. Nobody handed Margaret a list of chores. Her teenage grandchildren insisted she sit down while they carried dishes to the table. After dinner, they laughed over old family photographs, shared stories, and played card games late into the evening. Margaret hadn't realized how tense she'd become until she experienced what genuine appreciation felt like again. Later that night, curiosity led her to open her email. Since Ethan could no longer call, he'd started sending messages instead. There were 7 unread emails. The first demanded that she return the money. The second complained about canceled hotel reservations. The third blamed Vanessa. The fourth insisted everything had been a misunderstanding. The fifth asked where the SUV was. The sixth begged her to answer. Only the seventh contained a single sentence. "Mom, please talk to me." Margaret read each message carefully. One thing stood out. Not a single email contained the words, "I'm sorry." She quietly closed her tablet. Real apologies accepted responsibility. Excuses did not. She turned off the lamp beside her chair and watched snowflakes drift gently beyond the living room window. Some relationships could be repaired, but only after respect returned. For now, she was finally at peace. 3 weeks passed without a single phone call. Margaret expected Ethan to appear eventually. He had always believed that if he apologized just enough, everything would return to normal. This time would be different. A light snowfall covered the front yard one Tuesday afternoon as Margaret finished trimming the last of her rose bushes for winter. She had just stepped inside when the doorbell rang. Looking through the peephole, she saw Ethan standing on the porch. His shoulders were hunched against the cold, and a small duffel bag rested at his feet. He looked exhausted. Margaret unlocked the front door but left the glass storm door closed between them. "Hello, Ethan. Mom." His voice lacked the confidence she remembered. "Can I come inside?" "It's freezing out here." Margaret folded her arms. "We can talk right here." He glanced down, clearly embarrassed. "I've been trying to reach you. I know. You blocked my number. I did." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan sighed. "Everything has fallen apart." Margaret waited quietly. The vacation was canceled. "Vanessa and I have argued every day since then. We had to borrow money to cover our bills after the hotel charged cancellation fees. We're sharing one old car because the SUV is still at the airport." His voice cracked. "I know we handled things badly." Margaret studied her son carefully. For the first time in years, he looked less entitled and more defeated. "What exactly are you apologizing for?" she asked. Ethan blinked. "What do you mean?" "I've received 7 emails from you." He lowered his eyes. "I know, most of them were about money." He swallowed hard. "I suppose they were." "And today?" He hesitated before answering. "I'm apologizing for hurting you." Margaret remained silent. She wanted to believe him, but trust wasn't rebuilt with a single sentence. "It's more than the vacation, Ethan. I know." "No." She gently shook her head. "I don't think you do." She looked directly into his eyes. "You invited me across the country under false pretenses." He nodded. "You expected me to clean your house." Another nod. "You left pages of chores as though I worked for you." "I'm ashamed of that." "You laughed while doing it." His shoulders slumped even lower. "I'm sorry." Margaret took a slow breath. Then there was the notebook. The color drained from Ethan's face. I didn't think you'd see it, but I did." She repeated the words she had read. "Convince Mom to sell her house. Grandma can provide full-time childcare. Use her money to remodel our home." Each sentence landed like a stone. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. Vanessa wrote most of it. Margaret's expression didn't change. "But you knew about it." He couldn't deny it. "Yes, you never stopped her." "No, you benefited from it." "I did." Margaret nodded slowly. "That's why this isn't only about Vanessa." Ethan wiped his face. "I understand." "No." She spoke gently. "I think you're only beginning to." The winter wind rustled the trees surrounding the property. For several moments, only silence remained between them. Finally, Ethan asked quietly, "Do you still love me?" Margaret smiled sadly. Nothing could change that. Relief briefly crossed his face, then she continued, "But love doesn't mean accepting disrespect." His hopeful expression faded. "I spent years confusing generosity with responsibility." She stepped a little closer to the glass door. "I kept paying your phone bills. I bought your SUV. I funded an emergency account. I rescued you whenever life became inconvenient. I thought I was helping." She paused. "In reality, I was teaching you that someone else would always solve your problems." Ethan closed his eyes. "I never realized what I was becoming." "I believe you." She meant it, but realizing it is only the first step. He nodded slowly. "What happens now?" Margaret answered without hesitation. "Now you build your own life. No more financial support. No more expecting me to fix things. If we have a relationship going forward, it will be based on honesty, respect, and mutual effort." Ethan stood quietly for several seconds before whispering, "I want that." Margaret smiled softly. "Then earn it." She reached into her coat pocket and handed him a small piece of paper. Written on it was a single date. "Next Sunday. Call me then, not to ask for money, not to complain, just to talk." Ethan looked at the paper as though it were something precious. "I will." Margaret nodded once. "I hope so." She gently closed the front door. This time she didn't feel guilt. She felt peace. Sunday arrived with bright winter sunshine, reflecting off the fresh blanket of snow surrounding Margaret's home. She had no expectations. Whether Ethan called or not was entirely his decision. At exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. Margaret answered. "Hello? Hi, Mom. It was Ethan. You remembered," she said. "I told you I would." His voice sounded different. The confidence that once bordered on arrogance had been replaced with quiet humility. For nearly an hour, they talked. Not about money, arguments, or the past, but about ordinary things. Ethan asked how her garden was surviving the winter, whether she had finished the mystery novel she had mentioned months earlier, and if she was staying warm during the snowstorms. Margaret noticed something important. He never once asked for financial help. When the conversation ended, she smiled. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. The months that followed were slow but meaningful. Ethan found a second job doing weekend consulting work to pay off the debt created by the canceled vacation. Vanessa accepted extra hours at her marketing firm instead of expecting someone else to solve their financial problems. For the first time since they had married, the couple began living within their own means. The emergency account remained closed. Margaret never reopened it. Instead, she met with her financial advisor and updated every legal document she owned. Her savings, investments, and property were reorganized according to her wishes. She also drafted a detailed living will and appointed Emily as her healthcare representative. Not because she loved Ethan less, but because Emily had consistently respected her independence. Making those decisions filled Margaret with an unexpected sense of freedom. She realized planning for the future wasn't about preparing for death. It was about protecting the life she had worked so hard to build. Spring arrived, bringing colorful flowers back to Margaret's garden. One Saturday morning, a familiar sedan pulled into her driveway. Ethan stepped out, carrying several bags of soil and gardening supplies. He looked nervous. "I remembered you usually prepare the flower beds around this time." Margaret smiled. "You did. I thought maybe I could help." For the next several hours, they worked side by side without discussing the painful events of Thanksgiving. Sometimes healing didn't happen through speeches. Sometimes it happened while planting flowers, trimming hedges, and sharing quiet moments together. Before leaving, Ethan handed her a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Mom, I spent years measuring your love by what you gave me, instead of appreciating who you were. I expected sacrifices that I never earned, and I confused generosity with obligation. I can't change what I did, but I promise my future actions will never resemble my past behavior. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to become a better son. I love you." Margaret folded the letter carefully. This time, the apology felt genuine. Not because of the words, because of everything Ethan had done before writing them. Trust wasn't rebuilt through promises. It was rebuilt through consistent actions. Months later, Thanksgiving returned. Emily hosted dinner once again. To Margaret's surprise, Ethan and Vanessa arrived carrying homemade desserts. The atmosphere felt awkward at first. Then Vanessa quietly approached Margaret while everyone else prepared the table. "I owe you an apology." Margaret listened. "I treated you terribly," Vanessa admitted. "There isn't any excuse for what I did. I was selfish, and I encouraged Ethan to think the same way. I'm deeply sorry." Margaret studied her for several moments before replying. "I appreciate your honesty." Neither woman pretended everything was suddenly perfect. Real healing required time, but respect had finally entered the room. That alone made the conversation worthwhile. Later that evening, the family gathered around the dining table. Laughter filled the house. The children proudly carried serving dishes to the table, and Oliver insisted that Grandma sit beside him. Margaret looked around the room. One difficult decision nearly a year earlier had changed everything. Not because she had punished anyone, because she had finally valued herself enough to establish healthy boundaries. She realized the greatest lesson of her life wasn't that money created power. It was that self-respect created peace. Love without boundaries often becomes sacrifice. Boundaries without love become walls. But when love and boundaries exist together, relationships have the chance to grow stronger instead of becoming places where kindness is taken for granted. Margaret raised her glass with a grateful smile. This Thanksgiving felt completely different from the last, not because her family had become perfect, but because they had finally learned that genuine love begins with mutual respect.